Good evening. The League of Women Voters of Pocatello welcomes you to our 2022 Idaho Legislative Preview. I'm Susan Carter, the moderator of tonight's forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to promote active of citizens in government. Recordings of this event may not be used without the express written approval of the League. No part of a League-sponsored video production may be used in advertising or in any way to promote a candidate. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety. The format for tonight will be as follows. I will call on each participant and they will each
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
What? For their introduction, then 2 minutes to answer each question. Questions were compiled and sent to them by the Pocatello League. We will not be taking questions from the audience this evening and viewers will be muted. Panelists, please mute yourself when you are not answering. Tonight we will hear from Senator Jim Guthrie, Representative Randy Armstrong, and Representative James Ruchte. Senator Jim Guthrie has had a family emergency and is going to be joining us as soon as possible, but I will give his introduction as being the representative of District 28, Bannock and Power counties, and he is in his 5th term. He also served 1 term in the House from 2010 to 2012. The committees that he sits on, he is Vice Chair of the State Affairs, Commerce and Human Resources, Resources and Environment. Representative Randy Armstrong from District 28, Seat A, representing Bannock and Power counties, is serving his 3rd term. He is Vice Chair for the State Affairs Committee and is on the Business, Environment, Energy and Technology committees. Representative James Ruchte from District 29, Seat B, is serving his 1st term. He previously served 2 terms, 2006 through 2010. His committee appointments are Agricultural Affairs, Judiciary, Rules and Administration, Revenue, and Taxation. We were going to be starting with Senator Guthrie, but we will start with Representative Armstrong. And you will each have up to 4 minutes to share your views on the issues and bills that you expect to be introduced during the upcoming legislative session. Please tell us what you see as the greatest opportunity in the upcoming session. What do you see as the greatest problem? And what are your goals for this session? So Representative Armstrong, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Mr. Ruchte and hopefully Senator Guthrie will be in at that point.
I think Senator Guthrie is on now. His says Jim B.A. I'm pretty sure that's him.
Great.
You ready for me?
We are.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and thanks for the invitation to discuss some of these issues from the legislature with you. And I hope if any of you have any questions about anything I say that you'll I guess you have a situation they can ask questions if they need to, right? Anyway, I see the greatest opportunity for us right now is that we've got a lot of money right now that we've never had before in the legislature. And with that money, there's a lot of really good things we can do. I think we need to be very cautious that we don't necessarily commit that money to programs that have an extended long life because we're not going to have that money every year. But if we use it to help the school districts with some maintenance and repair that they need or one-time projects that they're working on. I know that the governor himself has said that he'd like it for water, sewer, and broadband, and I think there's a lot of things they're doing on that. I'm on the Environment and Technology committee, and that's broadband is one of the main issues that we talk about on that committee, and so I know that will be one. And the greatest problem I see is that we've got a lot of money, and that with that, everyone in the state thinks that we've got, when you look at that large volume, it looks like a huge number and that everybody should get everything they want, and it's not going to happen, and people are not going to be happy about that. But that'll work itself out, and there'll be some frustrations. But I think hopefully most everyone will be happy with the decisions are made. My goals this session is I've been working in the off season on Article 5 of the Constitution, and we're going to try and get an application from from Idaho signed and be part of that Article 5 program. And I think that will go a long ways to mending a lot of the problems we have if we can get that ultimately going and signed. And I'm hoping that we address the property tax issue. To me, that's one of the biggest concerns that we have. So that's what I have for.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Representative Ruckty next, and then we'll catch up with Senator Guthrie.
Hi, thank you for inviting us. This is a great opportunity to kind of get ourselves oriented before we head over to Boise and think about some of these issues. So I agree with Randy. I think the greatest thing we have going for us this legislative session is we have revenue, budget surplus money plus federal monies that we can allocate towards the needs of the state. And the state has a lot of needs, everything from broadband to transportation to water and sewer. And of course, education needs, both K through 12, higher ed, and early learning. There's no shortage of things that we need to spend taxpayer money on to make lives better for the citizens of the state. I do wish we had some sort of comprehensive long-term plan for the state. Utah did that back in about, I think it was around 2005 or 6. They had a comprehensive plan and they wanted to become the technological, the Intermountain West Technological Corridor, and all of their tax policy, their transportation policy, education policy, all of their policy was directed towards helping them accomplish that goal. And I think they were pretty successful in doing it, and ended up resulting in an economic boom for them. It also just focused how they did their policy. Unfortunately, we don't have anything like that, but it would be, that's what we really need as we decide how to spend this money. I think that our greatest problem that we have is that there is an extreme right-wing element in the state that is growing both in numbers and in influence. And they are by any means, a majority of the voting public, but they have an outsized influence to their numbers. And they are, the problem with it is we end up focusing a lot of our time on their agenda, their extreme agenda. And for every hour we spend on something they want to talk about, critical race theory or that the governor's a tyrant, it's an hour we don't have to spend on things like getting property tax under control, so that our seniors aren't being taxed out of their homes. So we've got to prioritize. We have to figure out what's important. We can either do things that are important for the citizens of Idaho, or we can sit and have debates about things that really don't make a difference in anybody's lives and aren't really that important. They're just made up issues that are designed to get clicks and donations.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie. Oh, you're muted.
There's some that would probably prefer I stayed muted, but anyway, thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to be here, and appreciate Pam with the reminder. I had a little family issue come up, and I would have probably blown right by this as she not reminded me. So I appreciate Pam for doing that. And I started my timer so I don't go over. I'll go over quickly what I think you'll see some of the issues this session. And I agree with Randy and James that the extra money is going to be not necessarily, I guess, a problem or an opportunity, depending on how it's spent, because it's going to have to be focused on one-time events rather than ongoing, because I don't think we know how much of the extra money we have is driven by all the COVID money that's come into the state. And I think we've got to be judicious with that. So that's going to be critical. I think you'll see some discussion over the vaccine mandates. There'll be some legislation to try to, push back on that, even though that is being adjudicated through the court system and ultimately the Supreme Court. I'm going to run my end of session legislation again at the end of session, the end of March or before. We run that.
I feel like I can spend it.
Anyway,
And that is not a lot of money.
somebody's talking there. But anyway, hopefully we can get that through so we can get the session done in a timely manner. Education obviously be a big topic with the money that's there, as will property taxes and how we go about addressing the ever escalating home values that are driving people out of their homes because the ever increasing burden that's placed on the homeowners for property tax. And if you try to abate that somehow, then you're shifting to the other classification. So that's really a tough one. The election dynamics are going to be interesting because you got a lot of interesting races this year. And that couples with what Representative Ruckty said about some of the fringe efforts that's going on in the state and how they're trying to drive policy. And that's going to that's going to be prevalent in the election process. And you take redistricting on top of that and different districts and different races and people moving to the Senate from the House. There's going to be an interesting play where people will try to use policy that they're pushing to try to get their name in the paper for election purposes. And so I think that's going to go along with what Representative Ruckty said, the more time we spend on foolishness like that, then the less time we have to spend on solving real problems. Water is going to be a big issue. What we do in terms of recharge, what we do in terms of managing our water. As you know, last year was a drought year. We've been in a drought for a while, and we were even ordered to shut our water off in the Portneuf drainage last year. And so that is really significant to our area, and there'll be discussions on water that's going to be very important. Road infrastructure, the bill that passed last year, there's going to be a lot of money going to roads and a lot of federal money coming in. So we should be in good shape as far as road repairs. My concern is they don't get too ambitious in an environment where the materials are high, labor costs are high. There's a shortage of labor. So I hope they don't overspend as they build out that road infrastructure. Higher ed was under attack last year a little bit and will be again this year, basically because of critical race theory. There's an effort to cut 20 million from higher ed just because they won't conform to what some view as not teaching critical race theory. And they've even threatened to go against some of the people that are running in races that don't support those cuts. And my timer just went off, so I'll wrap up right quick. I think you're going to see an effort for all-day kindergarten.
Thank you.
There's not enough workers in the state, and that's going to be consistent with the state workers as well. So interesting questions.
Okay, we're going to start on the questions, and you will each have 2 minutes to answer the questions. We are going to start with Senator Guthrie, and then I'm going to rotate through the panelists, beginning with a different one on each question. Our first question is on education funding. With a budget surplus nearing $1.6 billion, the governor is promoting tax relief for Idahoans and businesses while investing in education. How will you work to support schools and teacher salaries, which have been chronically underfunded? And will the legislature address school district supplemental levies and full-time kindergarten? How will you ensure higher education funding is not influenced by divisive ideologies? We will start with Senator Guthrie.
That's a lot rolled into one question. I will tell you, and it goes back a little bit to the fact that we don't know how much of this is one-time money. So in terms of huge tax cuts or tax relief, I certainly am sensitive to that, but I will be very cautious in how I approach supporting those kinds of things until we see what the longevity of this additional surplus we have. So I think while that may be something important, and it's the same with education, I don't think we can commit to long-term things in mass, in large financial volumes until we know till things kind of level out and stable out. So I think it's going to take a very methodical, thoughtful approach on how we either fund education or we look at tax cuts. And I'm probably more leaning on trying to make sure education is taken care of first, and then look at what could be done for property. And as far as higher ed, I know there's already some things in the works negative towards higher ed. So, there's just so much in that question. But I think the point is we're going to have to be very careful as we appropriate and as we set policy for those items you talk about.
Thank you. Representative Armstrong. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I gave all the really good stuff while I was muted. So anyway,
Sorry, we missed.
I agree with your perspective that the schools have been underfunded for long periods of time from the very beginning, I guess. I know we need to work on that, and this is a great opportunity with some of this money. But again, we need to be cautious, and I believe that we need to get the level of funding up so that people don't have to do these bonding things every year, because that in reality is ultimately ends up being really unfair to one district who can't get a bond passed, and some who they pass everything, and so it really makes it unfair to the children that are in education, and we need to figure out a way to get that funding up. And I don't know what that answer is, but it's something that definitely needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ruckty?
Yeah, the education has been underfunded for a long time. And, yes, the legislature has made some efforts to increase funding, but the reality is that over the last decade, we've had supplemental levies that have increased by 56%. And in fact, this year, we've reached a new record, $218 million in supplemental levies this school year. What does that mean? That means that those communities feel that the money they're getting from the state of Idaho is not enough to provide the education they want for their communities. And these are school districts all over the state. It's not the richest school districts, it's school districts all over the state are having to run these levies. So we could properly fund education. The bonus of that is that it would decrease local property taxes, because if people aren't having to pay for these supplemental levies, it means fewer dollars are coming out of their pocket for local property taxes. We've got to focus on early childhood education. I know that's the governor's priority. I think that's the priority of your delegation from Bannock County. We feel that early childhood education is critical. Studies show, as I think everybody here probably knows, that if a child starts school behind their peers, it is really hard for them to catch up. It doesn't mean they don't make progress at a proper rate. I think teachers do a good job of helping them, but they're still starting out well behind their peers. And it's hard for them to catch up through their school life. And so early childhood education can make all the difference in the world. We've got to stay out of this critical race theory issue, these social issues that keep coming up. They keep us from focusing on what's really going on in our schools and what we should be focused on. So I hope those issues, you know, I don't have a lot of hope they won't come up. I think they're going to come up and we're going to have to deal with them, but just know they shouldn't be part of what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to climate. The United States League of Women Voters' position on climate change calls for prompt action to cut this country's greenhouse gas emissions and invest in clean energy economy. The current administration recognizes the effects of climate change and is providing federal funds for projects. How should the legislature address the effects of climate change on Idaho's businesses and economy during this session? We'll start with Representative Armstrong. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think that that in most cases that's an issue that is better handled at the federal level. I don't know. There's a lot that we can do as a state legislature. But I think there's a lot of suspicion as to how legitimate that whole thing is. And people need to recognize that if we go to a completely green energy sources, that our utilities are going to, double, triple, whatever. And there's just no way you can keep the same lower cost for energy that we have right now and go to a different source. And so we need to be really cautious about that. But I don't see a lot of that happening or even being discussed in this session. That would be my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ruckte.
Yeah, I think the one thing I can agree with Representative Armstrong on that is that it's going to be difficult to get any of those issues passed in this legislature. But let me be clear about this. Climate change is real. The effects that it's having on our communities, our state, our nation, the world is real. Those things are everything from increased insurance premiums to having to allocate resources to fight fires. You're having more healthcare costs because of fires in the summer here in Idaho, and people having to get more treatment if they have lung issues, or maybe they don't have them, but they're going to end up with them because they're breathing in smoke all summer. I mean, you could go on and on and on about the problems that climate change is producing for our communities, and Idaho is not exempt from those. So, actually states are great incubators for ideas for how to handle these things. So there are things we could do. I hope electric cars start getting used more. I think they put less wear and tear on roads, but more importantly, less carbon output. But that requires us to make sure we have charging stations, that we don't overcharge electric car owners when they go to register their cars. You could punish people for essentially owning an electric car, and then that discourages them from trying it. Treasure Valley needs a state-of-the-art public transportation system. We need to put money into our highways and public transportation, and try to find ways to then reduce automobile usage. There are even experiments being done in agriculture, carbon farming, where you produce plants that absorb carbon out of the air through photosynthesis. It increases soil health. So there's lots of things we can do at the state level. Whether we do any of those things is another question.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. And I agree with Representative Armstrong. That's probably more of a federal issue, but I think there are some thoughts relevant from the state perspective. And the first thing that comes to mind is forest management. We're letting these forests get out of hand. We're not cutting the timber and grazing the forest grounds. You keep in mind that Idaho is 63% federally owned and 5% state owned. So over 2/3 of the state is government owned. And I don't think we're managing our forests right. And that leads to a lot of fires, a lot of unnecessary fires because of the fuel loading in the forest. I think one thing to keep in mind on clean energy, when we talk about electric cars or we talk about these kind of things, those batteries and that electricity that charges those cars comes from carbon-based efforts to generate electricity in a lot of cases. So that's not like it's not leaving a carbon footprint because you drive an electric car. So I think that's a little bit of an issue, a discussion to have. The other thing that I think is important is when you take a coal-fired plant or a gas-fired plant and you have to take in solar or wind or some kind of clean energy type into their system, they have to take those plants up and down to accommodate that electricity that's coming in. Well, when you fire those back up, it creates startup problems, which actually increases pollution into the air. So there's a lot of debate and a lot of discussion to be had. I do agree with Representative Ruckty. I think the human footprint on our economy, it has an impact. I think that global warming has some reality to it, but I don't think the solution is as easy as everybody just switching to green energy and thinking that we're solving the problem. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to election integrity. States have the constitutional responsibility of overseeing elections. Idahoans enjoy having few voting restrictions, such as same-day registration, no excuse absentee ballots, and early voting. Last session, there were bills to change these procedures. Are you concerned about voter fraud and voter suppression, in Idaho? And what will you do to ensure voting rights are protected? And this question will start with Representative Ruckty.
I am not concerned about there being a problem with voter fraud. Look, this has been studied to death nationwide and in Idaho. We just don't have problems with sophisticated voter fraud. Occasionally it happens, but it's very rare and random. And those things are, when they're found, people are prosecuted for them. Our clerks are professionals. They work really hard to get it right, and so do all the volunteers who support elections on election day, and of course the pre-election voting activities. These are people in our community who value our democracy and want to make sure that we carry out these elections with integrity, and they do a great job of it. So I voted against those efforts to restrict voting rights. Representative Moyle famously said voting should be difficult, or voting shouldn't be easy, I think is how he said it. I just don't agree with that. I think we need to encourage as many people as possible to participate. I think it needs to be an effort as well. The citizen needs to value it, but we do it right in Idaho, and I think we should just continue along the lines that do the things that we've been doing and not make it more difficult.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. I think we kind of came through the perfect storm. COVID came along and caused a lot of problems with people getting out to vote. And coupled with that, the governor and the secretary of state made some decisions that made it easier for people to vote. And I think there were some people that took exception to that. And then along with that, you had a presidential election that was very contentious and still continues to have traction as far as people's perspective that the election was rigged or stolen or whatever term you want to use. Overall, especially in Idaho, I don't think the election process is broken. I do think that there needs to be some safeguards to keep that integrity in place so that we don't, get into a situation where we have to worry about whether the votes are legitimate or counted right and that type of thing. And I think we have done some things in terms of the way they're opening the early ballots now. I think Ada County's been kind of a pace setter in that effort, the way they're doing some things, and they've really been a good pilot program for the state on keeping the integrity of those votes in place. But I don't think that we have a huge problem. I don't think it requires a serious overhaul. I don't know if we can say that for states across the union, but I think in Idaho we have a pretty good system.
Okay, thank you. Representative Armstrong.
Thank you. I agree with the other two that we don't appear to have a problem in Idaho. These people are very conscientious, and the laws that we have are really solid. Doesn't mean that we can't fine tune a few things periodically. We had a couple of bills last year that were pretty minor, except for the Mike Moyle bill, which was unusual, but all in all, we're in good shape, and I don't think we need to be concerned about that at all in Idaho.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to property taxes. Property taxes are increasing. The Idaho Center for Fiscal Policy reports that families who earn less pay a greater percentage of their income to property taxes. School district levies add to this burden, and companies are discouraged from moving to Idaho. Would there be fewer supplemental levies if the education budget increased? And what legislative options may be presented to ensure property taxes are more sustainable and equitable across all income levels? This one we'll start with Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. And that's really hard to say a lot in a couple of minutes, but a couple of things. When we increase the homeowners, we say that we're helping the homeowners, which that's where they've taken the biggest hit. But that does shift the taxes to other payers, including everybody that has a home valued less than $100,000. They actually see their taxes increase. So the less affluent are actually getting a tax increase when you increase the homeowner's exemption. There is a bill by Senator Rice that you may see that will do away with supplemental levies in schools in exchange for using part of the sales tax money to backfill that money to the districts. I don't know how much traction it'll get, but I think it's a discussion that'll be interesting to see develop. So I don't know what'll happen with that. We've got a lot of exemptions in the state from tax. In fact, on the sales tax, it's over $1 billion that could be, if all the exemptions were taken away, it would increase the revenue by over $1 billion, or we could lower the sales tax to around 3%. So you just look at all the dynamics in place that have created the situation we're in. And certainly right now at the forefront is the homeowners, what they're paying. And again, if we increase that homeowners, I've kind of laid that out. If we try to take and freeze their values, then it transfers that tax, or there's a tax shift of the other payers. So I think the reason it hasn't been solved before now, it's a very difficult issue to solve. So, but you will see a lot of discussion on that this session, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. Representative Armstrong.
Thank you. Property taxes to me are the most vile, evil tax that was ever developed by man. I think I can't imagine anything more evil than property taxes. I know that sounds a little over the top, but I think it's true in that. Without being too philosophical, the reason people came to America in the 1200s, the 1300s, the 1400s, and whenever were to own property. They couldn't own property in Europe, and people want to own their own place. They want their own farm, their own house. And immediately when the government initiated property taxes, everyone lost ownership to their property, and the government owns everything. And if you don't believe that, don't pay your rent to the government for a couple of years, and you'll find out that they do own your property. And we've got to somehow get away from that. And we talk about it every year. They've talked about it every year for a long, long time, and everybody's upset about it. But if no matter what issue you talk about, there's just a onslaught of people who are attacking you. For example, if the three of us came out with a bill and said let's lower property taxes, the county commissioners, the mayors, the city councilmen, that's that's how they run their operation, is through property taxes, and they would be all over us for that and wouldn't want us to do that. And that's not negative to them. That's watching over their domain. But we've somehow got to address this. It's totally out of control. And I talked to some of the people last year and said, what would happen if we just went to got eliminated property taxes completely and went to sales tax, and it would have to be 17%, which I don't think anybody wants to pay 17% sales tax. So anyway, I've got more to say, but I won't say any more.
Representative Ruckty.
Yeah, this is an extremely difficult problem to solve, but it's also one that we have to address. And really, I thought we would have addressed it last session. We went through the whole session. At the very end of the session, there was a comprehensive tax bill that was rushed through at the very last minute and it ended up having unintended consequences as predicted. Basically, everybody was unhappy with it, and it really didn't solve the problem. So we've now got to take another run at it. One of the problems we have is that while homeowners are paying more property tax, you have the agricultural and commercial sectors are paying less. It is complicated, though. I'm not going to suggest that in trying to solve problems, you can create more problems. But one of the things we could do is properly fund education. That would allow local school districts to run fewer levies. I don't think we should take away that tool from them altogether, but certainly we should properly fund education, and that'll result in less property tax to homeowners. We should increase the homeowners exemption and then put it back on an index. It used to be on an index about 10, 15 years ago, and the legislature increased the homeowners exemption, but they took it off the index. So I think they increased it to $100,000, took it off the index. And over time, that just got eaten away to where that 100,000 just wasn't worth what it used to be. So it's going to be a tough problem. I suspect legislators are already working on it. We're going to be working on it throughout the session.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to COVID vaccine mandates. The Idaho Special Legislative session passed a joint memorial opposing President Biden's vaccine mandate. Bills focusing on COVID vaccinations were held in a Senate committee. Was this a good investment of taxpayer funds? And will similar bills be introduced in this session? What's the government's role in supporting healthy communities and healthcare services? And please discuss your views on the rights of businesses, individuals, and the community. Representative Armstrong, we'll start with you. You're muted.
During the special session, we addressed a lot of those COVID mandate issues, and obviously couldn't get everyone to go along with our philosophy on that. But I am completely opposed to any of the mandates, and I just think it goes against all our constitutional rights to have the government tell you that you need to get a vaccination, or you need to do anything medically. You ought to be responsible for your own health. And I know the arguments. I read about it every day. I understand both sides, but in reality, if you watch the news at night or watch the national news, local news, you only hear one side, and that is that everybody needs to get vaccinated. And when you only hear one side, you're not receiving information. You're getting propaganda, and it's those mandates need to go away. And like Senator Guthrie said, the courts are ruling on them one by one, and so far the mandate, the people that are in favor of the mandates are losing most of the rulings, but it needs to be. We need to figure out a better solution.
Thank you. Representative Rupti?
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with Representative Armstrong more on this. Look, the only way in a pandemic that I can take care of my health and the health of my kids and the health of my family is in a pandemic if other citizens are doing the same. And in a pandemic, that means masks, it means vaccines, it means distancing from one another, it means doing the things that we have to do to protect our community and our children and make sure that we can live as normal a life as we can until we get the pandemic under control. So we couldn't disagree more. And I want you to realize just how upside down the world has turned with this pandemic, and how many on the far right believe that we should handle it. They want to tell business owners that they can't establish mask mandates or take other measures to protect their business. I'm a small business owner. I worked really hard with my law partner to build our small business. We employ 5 employees plus the 2 owners. We're very proud of what we've done. And if I felt like we needed to have a mask mandate or some other requirement in order to protect our clients and in order to protect all of our employees who have to come to work every day, you darn well better believe I should be able to make that decision. But under these proposals being made, and that we're going to see again, there will be an effort to make a law that says to a small business owner, you can't protect your property, that thing that you've worked so hard for, and you can't take care of your employees and your customers. And I just think that's wrong. I think it's crazy, frankly, that is where we are in society in this state, that those are the sorts of proposals we're talking about.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie?
Well, I'm probably going to come across as being a little bit of a hybrid between the two. So let me run through really quickly some of my thoughts. The special session was an absolute waste of time. I told our Senate leadership before it happened that we should not go back unless forced by a court order, because I knew it would be a waste of time. There was nothing productive that would come out of it. You will see the COVID mandate discussion come up again. Personally, I'm against the Biden's executive orders. I think they were wrong. I'm totally against it. The saving grace for me, as I look at that, is the courts will decide, and that will be the law of the land. And anything we can pass on the state level would be thrown out by virtue of a Supreme Court decision, which eventually will set the tempo for what's going to happen with those mandates. Now, let's see what we can do in the state relative to the employers in the state. I am against passing legislation that would mandate that an employer can't require their employees to have vaccines or wear a mask. That's a business model decision for an employer in the state of Idaho. And if I don't like the decision that Home Depot or JCPenney made to require masks and vaccine, I can go shop somewhere else. I would not be in favor of mandating that state employees get vaccinated. I think that should be a choice because that's in the government sector, but I would not meddle into the private sector on those type of mandates or what they can or can't do. I think the thing we have to remember, this whole thing was rolled out wrong. The message was from the start that they want you to force you to do this. You need to do this. It's a kind of a mandate instead of an encouragement. And I think as Americans and having that free spirit that we do, we're like, no, we don't like to be told what to do. That's just indicative of who we are as a free people. And so I think that's where a lot of the resistance is coming from. Plus, if you look at the messaging and the science, it is changing by the week. I mean, just recently they lessened the time frame for when you have to quarantine. So it's not an exact science. The science is always changing, and that's caused a lot of the stress and uncertainty. Sorry if I went over. I didn't see the stop.
Okay. We'll move on to federal monies. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 provided stimulus funds for state governments. Yet the legislature rejected $6 million grant for early childhood education and cut $2.5 million for higher education. More federal monies will become available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. What determines the decision to accept or reject these funds? How does the legislature plan to use these funds? And what are your priorities on the use of this money to improve the lives of all Idahoans? We'll start with Representative Ruckte.
Well, as to that $6 million grant, the reason we didn't accept that was because of disinformation, not just misinformation, but disinformation. It had to do with that critical race theory argument, and it caught fire. And before you knew it, we were rejecting $6 million worth of federal grant money that could have been used to help childcare centers provide quality and affordable childcare throughout the state. So it was a real travesty that happened. I just think it's horrible that happened. So, we got the federal money that's come in, and we got to decide between the surplus and the federal money, how much of it is, Senator Guthrie mentioned, is going to be ongoing and how much of it's just one time. And once we determine that, we also have to decide whether, as to the ongoing money, are we taxing too much? Is that why we have more money? Or is it because we're spending too little on things that have been underfunded for many years? Or is it an influx of new residents? And, that's why we have all this additional money, in which case we need to take a look at infrastructure needs and other things that those new citizens are using and going to need. So those are the things we have to look at. I just as a side note, when I was in the legislature before, about a decade ago, we didn't have this problem. We had the opposite problem, which was we didn't have enough money. And I remember at the time, the debates were always, boy, if we had the money, we would spend it on higher education. If we had the money, we would spend it on roads. We'd spend it on K through 12. Boy, if we just had the money. And so here I am 10, 14 years later, we have the money. And I'm telling you, there's resistance to spending the money on K through 12, on higher ed. In fact, we cut higher ed budgets last year.
Thank you. Let's see, we are to Senator Guthrie. Same question.
Okay, well, to start with, I voted for the $6 million bill that failed, and it actually, I think, got 2 attempts to get through, and it was very politically driven, the fact that got killed. And the irony is that President Trump is actually the one that was his program, as I understand it. He's the one that pushed that, and yet it was the hard right that killed that effort. So that's just a little bit of political irony. In terms of higher ed and some of the other things that's going on, and the federal money that comes in and how that gets spent, there has been an ever-increasing barricade built up as to how and when we accept those federal dollars. And to me, that's a little bit hypocritical, because when you look at our, I don't know, it's in the $9 billion range, our total budget, about 5 or so of that, or maybe more, is federal money. And so if we think we can get by without any of that federal money, then I think we're kidding ourselves. And so when you hear people say, well, Idaho gets back more federal money than they pay in, well, we probably should, because 63% of Idaho is federally owned. So we should get probably more than $1 for dollar back. And I think if we don't utilize that money and it just goes back to somebody else, then I think that's probably foolish on our part, but certainly we should use it wisely. And this session will really be a litmus test for how we handle that money coming in, because there is a lot of it.
Okay, Representative Armstrong.
Thank you. I don't know whether this is the hard right. Both of the representative senators said it was sort of a function of the hard right. And I'm not sure that $6 million was, but I think there's a basic philosophy, and I think that that each individual has, and you need to decide if you are in agreement with it or not, and that is that to me, there's a limited amount that the government can do, and that they can't do everything. And the philosophy they said was, well, if kids go to school pre-kindergarten, they're going to be way ahead of the kids who just go to kindergarten. Well, there's a lot of things. So maybe we should start them 2 years before that, and we start them, pre-birth, listening to recordings of something. I mean, you can get way out of line on that thing, but I think there's a basic standard that you say, okay, I don't think the government should be involved. I voted against the $6 million, but it wasn't because of the money. It wasn't because of anything else. It's because I think you have to draw a line in the sand and say, where does it end? How much are we going to do for people as a government and not have people take care of themselves? And so I think that's the reason that $6 million didn't pass, I believe. And it had nothing to do with critical race theory. It had nothing to do, well, it did have something to do with critical race theory, but that was spoken of a lot. And so that did have some serious problems, but there were a lot of people that voted against it, not on the critical race, but just that the government's doing too much already, and it's just another program that the government's stepping in to
Thank
do.
you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question on childcare. The COVID pandemic has shown the necessity of reliable and affordable childcare for families across the state. Last session, the legislature rejected federal monies that would have helped fund struggling families and local programs for early childhood education. Are these funds still available? And how should the state help working families access affordable childcare to allow parents to remain in the workforce? Senator Guthrie, we'll start with you.
Actually, Representative Ruchte and Representative Armstrong were with me, and I think a couple others over at American Falls, where we went on a tour where they're doing a lot of creative things and having collaboratives where they involve a lot of different players in the community to do, the education piece as well as childcare, where people can have a place to take their kids. And it's, I think, a very innovative and kind of a community supported process that I think you have to kind of lean towards, rather than strictly the government just taking care of everything. Because I don't totally dismiss Representative Armstrong's philosophy in that we can't do everything for everybody. There's got to be some buy-in by those that are receiving the benefit. And so those are the kind of programs that I guess I would lean towards that would utilize, and I think there will be federal money. I don't know of anything specifically, but I got to believe there's some that would have the opportunity to find its way into that use. The other dynamic that's going on is there's a lot of folks now that are changing their attitude towards work and maybe don't want to work. We're seeing that people aren't going back into the workforce, and everywhere you go, there's help wanted signs, and maybe part of that's driven by the fact they can't get childcare. But I think it will be part of the discussion. I think there will be money, and I think if we will look at programs similar to what we viewed in American Falls and maybe try to duplicate that on somewhat of a statewide effort, maybe that's the answer. But again, that's not an easy one either. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ruchte.
Yeah, I'm hoping that grant still finds its way to Idaho. I think actually Senator Guthrie and I are pretty close, or of similar mind at least, on this issue. He mentioned the collaboratives we went to see, or the collaborative we went to see in American Falls. To me, it was just a great example of how the business community, local governments, local schools, private daycare centers, and then families can work together to come up with a solution to this problem. Childcare is a weird problem because for whatever reason, it doesn't respond to market forces like many other services do. It is unaffordable. And if it's affordable, you really got to worry about the quality that you're getting or the reliability. And I don't know why that is, but it needs a little extra help. And so these collaboratives this collaborative we went and looked at, the collaboratives that were going to be funded by the $6 million, they did a good job of finding local solutions to those challenges. Keep in mind, this is, and we all know this, if we have raised kids or we have grandkids or kids that are raising kids, this is a huge challenge for families, finding this sort of affordable quality childcare so that you can be a reliable worker, so you can make a living for your family. And our largest corporations and our small businesses all need their employees to be able to have access to this. In fact, IACI, the business lobby for the largest businesses in the state, is really focused on this because they know that they've got some great employees out there who just won't re-enter the job market, because childcare affordability, reliability, quality is a barrier to them.
Thank you. We are running short on time. We'll have one more question, and this has to do with lobbyists. Hundreds of lobbyists impacted legislation in Idaho during the 2021 legislative session. They represented agriculture, businesses, local governments, healthcare, and political interest groups. How are you influenced by lobbyists? Where do you go for reliable information? What influences how you vote on a particular bill? And do emails, letters, and phone calls from constituents make a difference? Representative Armstrong?
Thank you. I think that emails and letters particularly have a huge impact, especially if whoever sends the emails will say who they are and where they live. If they're in my district, I pay really close attention, but I get hundreds of emails, as everyone else does in the legislature, from people now all over the United States. They're all watching what's going on and they're all commenting. And I frankly, I don't really care what those people think. I'm concerned with what the constituents in my district want to say about it. And so it does have a huge bearing on me as to how I'm developing my line of thinking on that thing. So I would encourage people to send emails, but again, say where you're from and that you're from my district or whatever. And I would pay close attention to that. As far as lobbyists, I love to hear the lobbyists. There's always somebody in favor, somebody opposed. I like to hear both sides. They have lots of time to give you the whole thing, the whole story on both sides of the issue. But I don't know that I've had been overly swayed by any of them. I think I voted against them as much as I voted with them. So I don't think they have as much influence negatively as people like to think, that they're sort of running the whole thing. I don't think that's happening.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ruckte.
Yeah, so this is going to sound anti-intuitive, but I really try, and I think so do a lot of legislators, to listen as much as possible when making a decision about a bill. I mean, I listen to discussions, like if the Bannock County legislators, we get together for a meeting and they're talking about a bill, I'm listening because I'm trying to learn stuff. I listen to constituents when they contact me about the issue. And I listen to, or I do research on my own. And yes, I listen to the lobbyists. I always think, I feel the same way Randy does. A lot of people, lobbyists are easy targets, just like legislators are, I suppose, for criticism. But you learn pretty quickly who the good lobbyists are. If a lobbyist gives you bad information or you feel like they weren't being straight with you, that's kind of it between you and that lobbyist. And they know that. And so most of them do their best to give you straight information. I always ask lobbyists, who's on the other side of this issue and what will they say? And then often I go talk to that person just to get that information straight from them. They do, you know, if they're doing their job right, they're educating us on the issues. They usually have access to more of the details and information. But that's not the only person you listen to. You listen to other people involved, and then, of course, your local constituents.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie?
Yeah, as far as the individual contacts with emails and text or phone calls or whatever, particularly emails, if I see the same message coming dozens of times and it's just got a different name on it, that doesn't get near as much credibility as something that's individually addressing the topic, or maybe with some examples, because you can tell that it's just an email that somebody else has generated and encouraged their group to send it on to you. And it's the same email. As far as a lobbyist, the way I look at it is this. In a way, everybody that talks to a legislator is a lobbyist. They're lobbying for something that they want to see either passed or defeated. And it's just like we're elected to go up and speak for the 45, soon to be 53,000 residents in our districts on behalf of them. A lot of these are speaking on behalf of thousands of people that are in a group. You know, you take IACI, that's representative of business and industry and all these people out there that have a board of directors that vote on policy and what they want to see. So when you talk to that lobbyist, you're hearing from all of these other voices that have voted on that this is the policy we want to see. So it can be a very powerful message. Well, one of the litmus tests I use, if I ask them, where's the opposition to this bill or what's the downside to this bill, and they don't have some good feedback, then I get a little suspicious, because usually there's always something that can be said that is contrary to what they're telling you. And if they're not willing to say that, then I'm going to go seek it out somewhere else, because there's always two sides of the story. But the bottom line is lobbyists are an important part of the process. And I think Representative Ruckty said it maybe the best. You find out pretty quick who the good ones are and who the ones you can maybe trust to give you the straight story. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Many thanks to our legislators and to our audience for attending this evening. This forum was recorded and will be available for viewing in the next few days on the League of Women Voters Pocatello website and also on YouTube. We want to remind you that your voice matters. Be sure to contact our legislators with your comments and questions. Just a quick reminder before we close, our next legislative forum will be January 11th at 7 p.m. We will hear from our other three legislators, Senator Mark Nye and Representatives Kevin Andrus and Dustin Manwaring. You can find a link to that Zoom event on the Pocatello League of Women Voters website. Thank you again to everyone for participating, and good night.